Welcome back to episode 21 of More Than Words, where we discover that Victorian linen workers invented their own sign language just to cope with industrial hammering, and that Tyrone contains 10 nearly identical lakes whose names sound like someone sneezed onto the Ordnance Survey map. This week, a mythological fugitive couple who left a trail of dolmens across Ireland like prehistoric Airbnbs, a white hare turned rural resistance anthem with possible shape-shifting tendencies, and a town marked forever by August the 15th, 1998, a date that splits its history as cleanly as partition split Ireland. Expect car racing in farming country, where people deliberately destroy functional vehicles for entertainment, wind turbines doubling as weather apps, and a village whose name literally means the flagstone, even though the flagstone itself has long since vanished like a prop someone forgot to return. Think industrial noise meets Bronze Age romance meets the deadliest single incident of the Troubles. Narrated by someone whose gas barbecue was blown across the garden twice by Storm Claudia, who spent the week staring at gym walls while technically moving but going absolutely nowhere, and who's now questioning whether walking to nowhere whilst watching Homes Under the Hammer counts as progress. This is stage 21. Grill interrupted. Let's talk numbers. So, the total distance covered so far is 1,165.5 kilometres. That's just over 40% of the entire 2,884 kilometre journey, which feels significant. It actually is. We're now 2/5 of the way through. The time taken in real life to cover the 55.5 kilometres for this stage was the 16th to the 21st of November 2025, and my current position is 4 days ahead of schedule. We've held our ground since last week, which suggests I've finally stopped bleeding time like a faulty radiator. IRL. The wind beneath my wings. Some weeks you have more talking points than you know what to do with. Wallet disasters, competitive golf humiliation, prize money redemption. Other weeks, the weather takes one look at your outdoor exercise plans, laughs, and says, "Giving you nothing this week, mate." Stage 21 fell firmly into the latter category, a week where real-world kilometres mostly came courtesy of indoor pursuits rather than scenic walks, with a matching shortage of both interest and interludes, because winter finally arrived with all the charm of a tax bill landing in January. It wouldn't be very British of me not to talk about the weather, so let's talk about the weather. Endless rain, relentless wind, plummeting temperatures, and snow auditioning for a comeback tour. The sort of week where stepping outside feels less like fresh air and exercise, more like a boot camp designed by rain clouds and wind turbines. Fortunately, none of this was the size and scope of Storm Claudia, the meteorological event that arrived last week with minimal warning and maximum property damage. But given that this week delivered a budget version of the same conditions, it feels appropriate to revisit that particular slice of chaos, because some experiences deserve memorialising, and Storm Claudia definitely earned its place in the annals of weather best remembered indoors. Claudia arrived with all the subtlety of a brick through a window, and considerably less warning than you'd expect from modern meteorology. Winter storms are nothing new in northern England, where blustery is the default setting, and mild means you can feel your fingers, but Claudia felt different. More destructive, less accurately forecast. Not quite Michael Fish's legendary 1987 faux pas, when he reassured a caller there definitely wasn't a hurricane coming mere hours before the Great Storm flattened half of southern England and redefined what getting the forecast slightly wrong means, but close enough to make you wonder if the Met Office had spent the week choreographing TikTok dances instead of reading weather models. Claudia didn't hit fish-level catastrophe, but locally it caused significantly more damage than any storm in recent memory. Trees down, cars crushed, roofs redistributed across postcodes. The sort of weather event that makes you grateful for home insurance and nervous about anything not bolted to concrete. My contribution to Storm Claudia's chaos was strictly barbecue related. Seems weird, sure, but stay with me. Our not insignificant gas barbecue, a substantial piece of outdoor cooking equipment that normally sits with the stoic permanence of garden furniture that knows its place, was blown across the garden and deposited on its side. Twice. The first time I trudged out in 60 mph winds to retrieve it, wrestled it upright, repositioned it, and returned inside feeling vaguely heroic. The second time was the following morning, when Claudia had almost fizzled out. I trudged out again, righted it, and accepted that she'd won this particular battle. Of course, I'm at least 6 months away from discovering whether its windy gymnastics left any lasting scars, or whether the barbecue that briefly tried to sprout its own wings will still be capable of incinerating chicken wings when summer finally returns. Back to this week then, and more weather that makes you question the entire concept of outdoor exercise. The gym became my natural habitat. Spin bikes, treadmills, and those indoor cycling sessions where you're technically moving but going absolutely nowhere, like a deluxe hamster wheel with brighter lights and significantly worse music. There's something a bit unsatisfying about indoor exercise when you're supposed to be accumulating kilometres for a virtual challenge. A treadmill can tell you you've walked 5 kilometres, but your soul knows you've just stared at a wall for 45 minutes while BBC News played on mute and someone nearby grunted through their third set of bicep curls. It counts towards a total, but it doesn't feel real. Like claiming you visited Tokyo because you bought sushi in a petrol station. The spin bike offers marginal improvement. At least you can pretend you're climbing a hill, even if that hill is actually just a resistance knob and your view is the gym's inspirational poster about crushing your limits, which actually makes you want to crush the poster. But kilometres are kilometres, and when the alternative is getting horizontally rained on while fighting 40 miles per hour winds, the gym starts looking less like a compromise and more like sensible risk management. The barbecue, meanwhile, remains in its post-Claudia position, secured, anchored, and eyeing the conservatory with the expression of something that's learned its lesson about independent travel. This is the reality of winter exercise in Britain. Embrace the elements or retreat indoors, and make peace with the fact that walking to nowhere while watching Homes Under the Hammer counts as progress. Virtual Insanity Stage 21. Wellbrook to Lough. This virtual stage opens with the thunder of wooden hammers at Wellbrook Beetling Mill and closes with the whoosh of turbines above Lough. From linen to wind, Tyrone keeps making noise, just with better air quality these days. Between these bookends lie Bronze Age stones, lakes that tie tongues in knots, and a stock car track where every bumper gets its moment. It's a road of ghosts, gold and good intentions, proof that Tyrone's soundtrack is less symphony, more jam session. Hammers, turbines, and the occasional crash cymbal when someone forgets the brakes. Nailed it. We kick off stage 21 at Wellbrook Beetling Mill, tucked into a wooded glen outside Cookstown, the last working water-powered beetling mill in Northern Ireland. Beetling, for the uninitiated, is the noble art of hammering linen until it shines. Centuries of textile innovation, and someone still thought, yes, what this fabric needs is a good belting. Industrial ironing with a sledgehammer, Northern Ireland's contribution to both fashion and tinnitus. Workers even developed sign language to cope with the din. Forget ping-pong tables and beanbags, the original workplace wellness scheme was basically charades. And when the mill finally fell silent on Sundays, local children complained they couldn't sleep. The only kids in history to demand more industrial noise, essentially inventing 9-inch nails, minus the eyeliner and the existential dread. The mill finally closed in 1961, when synthetic fabrics like rayon and polyester made linen economically unviable. The National Trust stepped in, restoring the building and machinery, and reopened it to the public in 1970. Step inside today, and it feels less like time has stood still, more like time has politely asked if anyone minds continuing very slowly. Volunteers demonstrate how the water wheel powers the beetles, the hammers, not the insects or the Fab Four. Although if Ringo had been involved, the beat would have been steadier and possibly better syncopated. Bog Standard Romance. Heading west along the A505, Dunamore appears between Cookstown and Omagh, a village you could walk across before your kettle boils. Its name is contested: Dunach Moor, Great Church, or Dundamore, Fort of the Peat Bog. The church is unremarkable, the fort vanished, but the bog persists, because bogs never die, they just sulk forever. The hills around Dunamore keep older stories. The wedge tomb known as Dermot and Gronya's Bed rests in the grass, a prehistoric Airbnb with atmosphere in place of amenities. Legend says that Diarmid and Grania, Ireland's most famous mythological fugitives, sheltered here during their flight from Fionn McCool. The story goes that Grania had been promised to Fionn, but at the wedding feast she took one look at him and decided she wasn't signing up for the pensioner special. Instead she fell for Diarmid, the handsome warrior with a so-called love spot that made him irresistible, though frankly no one wants to think too hard about what that was or where it was located. Diarmid wasn't keen to betray his leader, but Grania wasn't taking no for an answer. She put him under a gesh, a binding spell, basically the Celtic equivalent of clicking "I agree to the terms and conditions" and discovering you've accidentally eloped. From then on, the pair fled across Ireland, leaving behind a trail of dolmens and wedge tombs, each one a supposed overnight stop, proof that mythical lovers needed a bed and breakfast as much as anyone else. The Dunamore tomb is unusually well preserved, its divided entrance still standing, as if waiting for them to check in again. Prehistoric accommodation with a cancellation policy measured in millennia. Their story ends badly, of course. Diarmid was gored by a boar, and Fionn, who could have saved him, delayed out of spite until it was too late. It's the only love triangle in history where the jealous ex basically invented passive-aggressive first aid. Hare today, gone tomorrow. Further on, Creggan sprawls across upland Tyrone. Its name, and Creggan, the Little Rock, underselling the place by several thousand acres. Nothing here is little. The land is broad, boggy and stubborn, the kind of ground that looks like it's been holding a grudge since the Ice Age and has no intention of letting it go. The best known creature to slip out of Creggan isn't a saint or a warrior but a hare. The Creggan White Hare, immortalised in song. First recorded in 1944, the ballad tells of Barney Conway and his pedigree greyhounds chasing a hare that always outruns them. The dogs pant, the hunters curse, and the hare bolts into legend. Folklore already had hares pegged as otherworldly, creatures that could shapeshift into witches, lure men into endless hunts, or vanish into the mist. Basically the mythic version of that mate who always does a French exit at the pub. Slight aside, a French colleague once told me that in his country this disappearing act is actually called an English exit, and elsewhere it's an Irish exit or even a Polish exit. Proof, if any were needed, that every nationality thinks every other has appalling manners when it comes to leaving a party. Anyway, back to hares. Some accounts push the symbolism further, with the hare's refusal to be caught becoming a metaphor for freedom and resistance, a rural emblem of liberty in a region marked by struggle. Some saw it as nature's indomitable spirit, others as a shapeshifter slipping through colonial nets. In pubs and songs, it was retold as both entertainment and allegory, proof that oral tradition can carry politics in its paws. The song itself gave the hare a second life. Folk singers from Paddy Tunney to Christy Moore kept it running, and it became a rural anthem. A reminder that sometimes the underdog is literally a hare, which is nothing if not poetic, and everything if you're the greyhound left wheezing in the field. Gridloch. Between Dunamore and Mountfield lies what can only be described as cartographic exhaustion, a constellation of small lakes, tarns and water-filled depressions, all beginning with loch and ending with increasingly desperate syllables, as if the Ordnance Survey ran out of creativity somewhere around lake number 7 and just started sneezing into the map. Loch na Moonag, Loch na Fracaga, Loch an Illan, Loch na Feeborn, Blachloch, Loch Cairn, Loch na Velorn, Loch na Cracken, Loch na Cree, and Loch na Creevaga, 10 bodies of water within a few square miles, each demanding individual recognition despite being functionally identical, small, peaty, prone to flooding, home to the same species of algae, and the occasional confused duck. I've apologised more than once for my pronunciations on this podcast, and I do so again here, as I suspect these were particularly awful. I'm so sorry. The names follow a pattern. Loch is straightforward, Irish loch meaning lake. What comes after is where things get interesting, or at least revealing about what our ancestors thought worth memorialising. Loch na Feeborn translates as Lake of the White Wood, or Lake of the Aspen Grove, suggesting there was once trees here before Ireland's enthusiastic deforestation. Loch na Cree and Loch na Creevaga are variations on Cragach, meaning rocky or branching. So these are the rocky lakes or possibly the branchy lakes, depending on whether you're prioritising geology or vegetation. Black Loch breaks from tradition by ditching the Irish entirely and going for brutal English literalism. It's black, it's a loch. Congratulations to whoever named it for finishing early and going to the pub. Loch Cairn, Lake of the Cairn, suggests there was once a burial mound or stone pile nearby, a landmark for travellers, a memorial for the dead, or just a really big pile of rocks someone decided was significant. Loch na Creggan might be the best name of the lot. It sounds less like a lake and more like the noise your knees make when you finally sit down after a long walk. It's from the Irish, which probably means Lake of the Plundered Place or Lake of the Raid, suggesting this was either the site of castle rustling, inter-clan violence, or just a convenient spot to hide stolen livestock where nobody would think to look, because who checks the lake? What unites these lochs is their anonymity. Stand beside any one of them and you'd struggle to know which without a GPS and a very detailed map. They're all small, none exceeds a few acres. They're all shallow, rarely more than a few metres deep, prone to drying up in hot summers, rare, and overflowing in wet winters, constant. They're all peaty, which means the water is brown, acidic, and looks considerably less appealing than wild swimming Instagram influencers would have you believe. Welcome to the Lough Cluster, where every lake has a name, nobody remembers which is which, and the midges treat them all equally, as prime breeding territory and a year-round assault on anyone foolish enough to stand still for more than 30 seconds, or, as the locals call it, Tuesday. Crash of the Titans. A few miles on sits Mountfield, which sounds grand until you realise it's just another townland whose main distinction is being slightly more elevated than its surroundings. In Tyrone, Mount means hill that wouldn't trouble a mobility scooter, and field means exactly what it says, grass occasionally interrupted by cows. Mountfield, Irish Achaad, High Field, sits northeast of Omagh on the A505 and is regarded as a gateway to the Sperrin Mountains. The Sperrins stretch across Tyrone and Londonderry, with peaks like Sowell and Mulla Carn rising over 2,000 feet. The range is a designated area of outstanding natural beauty, known for its moorland, blanket bog and glaciated valleys. For the uninitiated, a blanket bog is what you get when rain keeps arriving and decomposition gives up, leaving peat to stack itself over centuries. The Sperrins are basically nature's way of saying, don't wear suede. Then, something genuinely unexpected on the A505. Blythe stock car racing, which is either Northern Ireland's best kept motorsport secret, or proof that given enough space and minimal planning permission, someone will inevitably start ramming cars into each other for entertainment. Stock car racing in Tyrone feels delightfully incongruous, like discovering a rooftop infinity pool in Roscoe or spotting a ski slope in Strabane. This is farming country, land of tractors and silage, yet here's a venue where people deliberately destroy perfectly functional vehicles while spectators cheer and drink questionable beer from plastic cups. The sport has a working class heritage across the UK and Ireland. Affordable motorsport for people who can't afford Formula 1 tickets, or the sort of cars that require a degree in engineering to service. Blythe keeps the tradition alive in Tyrone, hosting events where drivers with names probably like Mad Dog and the Destroyer prove that you don't need £1 million budget to go fast and crash spectacularly. You just need a welded roll cage, questionable brakes and comprehensive life insurance. Racing happens on weekends, weather permitting, which in Tyrone means occasionally. Admission is affordable, the crashes are real, and nobody's pretending this is Monaco. The only pit stop here is someone shouting, "Try turning it off and on again." Rock of Ages. On the approach to Omagh, Killyclocher, Irish Kilonclocher, Rocky Forest, demonstrates the full range of Irish place naming creativity. There were trees, there were stones, someone pointed at both and said, "Job done." The stones may have been masonry, actual walls rather than the timber structures that Irish rain cheerfully dissolved, or prehistoric markers left by Bronze Age contractors who clearly got paid by the megalith. The parish church, St Mary's, has early Christian origins, placing Killyclocker in that golden age of Irish monasticism when monks were busy copying manuscripts, brewing beer, and trying to explain to Viking raiders that burning monasteries was poor cultural policy. By medieval times, the parish was established enough to warrant mention in ecclesiastical records, the historical equivalent of getting your Wikipedia page. Today, Killyclocker is farming country. Cattle, sheep, small-scale mixed agriculture operating on land that's been worked continuously since the plantation, probably since the Norman invasions, possibly since the Bronze Age farmers who erected those stones in the first place. The stones, if they ever were standing stones, are either long gone, incorporated into walls, or still standing somewhere being ignored by cows who've seen it all before. Campsie sits on the outskirts of Omagh, a townland of about 1,900 people, big enough to count, small enough that everyone still knows whose dog keeps escaping and whose teenager pranged the family car. The name derives from Camsan, though what exactly it means is murky. It could come from cam, which is crooked or bent, hinting at a curved stream or ridge, or it might be a personal name, some forgotten chieftain whose only legacy is a townland and absolutely no other historical record. It appears in Griffith's valuation from 1858 to 64, that comprehensive tax survey which documented every plot, tenant and structure in mid-19th century Ireland with the thoroughness of people who really wanted to know who owed what to whom. Today its jewel is Macalea's Bar, established in 1873 and believed to be Omagh's oldest pub. Originally serving only whisky and stout, it later diversified into shipping agency services, because nothing says have another round like booking your Atlantic passage between pints. Sacred Plain, Silent Pain. Omagh is County Tyrone's county town, sitting at the confluence of the Drumrah and Camoin rivers which join to form the River Strule. It's been a settlement since the Gallic period, reshaped by the plantation of Ulster in the 17th century and marked indelibly by August 15, 1998, a date that divides the town's history into before and after as surely as partition divided Ireland. Railways arrived in the 1850s and 60s. The Londonderry and Enniskillen Railway in 1852, links to Enniskillen in 1853 and Belfast in 1861. For a century, Omagh was a proper transport hub. Then came the Irish equivalent of beaching cuts. The Portadown-Omagh-Londonderry line closed in 1965, leaving Tyrone with no rail service, a situation that persists despite reopening plans being discussed as regularly as the mythical bridge to Scotland. Omagh has produced its share of notable people: actor Sam Neill, playwright Brian Friel, Eurovision winner Linda Martin, and Jimmy Kennedy, who wrote The Teddy Bear's Picnic. That's a CV spanning Hollywood dinosaurs, Eurovision ballads, and woodland sing-alongs, which is quite the LinkedIn profile. But Omagh's modern identity is inseparable from August 15, 1998. At 2:30 p.m, a phone call warned of a bomb near the courthouse. Police cleared the area, inadvertently directing people towards Market Street, where a red Vauxhall Cavalier was parked. At 3:10 p.m, £500 of explosives detonated, killing 29 and injuring 220. It remains the deadliest single incident of the Troubles, carried out by the Real IRA, a splinter group opposed to the Good Friday Agreement. The aftermath was seismic, condemned by the Queen, the Prime Minister, Ireland's President and Taoiseach, US President Bill Clinton, and crucially by Sinn Féin's Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness, their first unequivocal denunciation of a Republican bombing. The Real IRA claimed the civilian deaths were accidental and declared a ceasefire a month later, though they subsequently resumed operations. Both British and Irish governments rushed through sweeping anti-terrorism laws, allowing convictions based on senior police officer testimony and curtailing the right to silence. Despite extensive investigations, numerous arrests, and civil proceedings that found 4 Real IRA members liable, no individual has been criminally convicted. In February 2023, the UK government announced an independent inquiry into whether the attack could have been prevented. An acknowledgement of intelligence failures, informant warnings that weren't acted upon, and long-standing questions about who knew what and when. Today, Omagh is a town of about 22,000 trying to be more than its worst day. The centre has been rebuilt. The Oasis Riverside project opened in 2015. Healy Park, home of Tyrone GAA, was Ulster's first floodlit Gaelic stadium, and the Ulster American Folk Park tells the story of Irish emigration to America. In 2015, Omagh was even ranked as the happiest place in the UK, proof that resilience can show up in statistics as well as in people. Yet August the 15th remains. Memorials stand, families remember, and the town carries its grief quietly. The name Omagh means sacred plain, a reminder that its story stretches far beyond one day. Draft dodgers. Heading out past the bypass, the houses thin and hedges start quietly reclaiming their territory. The road drifts towards Clanabogan, a name that feels equally at home in Northern Ireland or buried somewhere in a Tolkien appendix next to an obscure elven footnote. The Irish Clúin Vogan translates as O'Ogan's Meadow, a surname preserved in soil rather than chronicles. Another form, Clúin Vogan, Meadow of the Little Huts, lingers in local lore, conjuring images of clustered shelters, a medieval Airbnb before anyone thought to monetise the concept. Clanabogan reminds us that even the smallest place can carry both ancestry and myth without making a fuss about it. Then comes the modern miracle of Tappahan Wind Farm, 19 towers lined up like lampposts on steroids. Commissioned in 2005 with 13 turbines and extended in 2009 with 6 more, it produces 28.5 megawatts, which sounds impressive until you remember that Doc Brown needed 40 times that to fire Marty McFly back to 1985. In real-world terms, it's enough to keep about 12,000 homes lit, or at least to keep the kettle boiling while you complain about the view. The controversy was predictable. Noise, shadow flicker, property values, the usual NIMBY bingo card. These days most locals just use them as weather apps. If they're spinning, bring a coat. Farmers lease the land and pocket steady income, environmentalists applaud, and everyone else argues about whether the turbines spoil the landscape or just give the sheep vertigo. Northern Ireland now gets close to half its electricity from renewables, mostly wind, which means turbines like this have to exist somewhere. Surveys show 77% of UK residents back new wind farms to cut bills. Better here than nowhere, the logic goes, though here is always someone's kitchen window. False flag stone. We end at Lough, Irish Unliach, the flagstone, a village whose name feels like a lament, but really comes from a flat rock that once marked the spot. Whether that stone was a meeting point or just something people kept tripping over, it's long gone, buried under tarmac or carted off by someone who needed a slab more than a story. Historically, Samuel Lewis's Topographical Dictionary of Ireland from 1837 described Lough as a modest postal village with a few houses and a fair held annually. Local history adds that without notable natural resource and sitting well away from Lough Erne, the waterway that largely ruled commerce in Fermanagh since time began, it was never destined to flourish. In other words, Lough has always had a lack of commercial opportunity, a lack of natural bounty, a lack of easy access to trade routes, and, of course, now has the lack of its original flagstone. The stone's gone, but the punchline remains welded to the name. So ends Stage 21. From thundering beetling mills through scattered townlands to stock car racing, from a market town marked by tragedy to wind farms generating megawatts and muttering controversy, finishing at a crossroads named after a missing rock. It's 30-odd miles through Tyrone's agricultural heart, where linen mills closed decades ago, where farming continues because it always has, and where even the smallest settlement carries history whether it has to or not. That's the story for now. See you next time, when the road leaves Tyrone behind and Fermanagh's lakes start edging into the spotlight. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.